My name is Dolores Garcia. I'm from the United States Department of Labor, and I'm going to tell you how to effectively apply for a federal job. Now, I'm so glad that you got to listen to Rachel and to Jenny, because you're going to see that in some ways we follow a lot of the same rules. Next slide, please. Today, we're going to be talking about federal pay and advancement, hiring authorities, building a federal resume, the job search, the application process, and what happens next. And if you have any questions along the way, well, try and raise your hand or unmute yourself. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The first thing we're going to address is federal pay, because I think that's something that you want to know about. Next slide, please. In most federal jobs, over 70% that you see on www.usajobs.gov are under the general schedule, GS. And it's just like in school. There are grades 1 through 15, and there's locality pay. Depending upon where you live, you might get a locality adjustment, which will make your salary higher. Now, a GS2, remember, it's GS1 through 15. A GS1 is no school, no education. A GS2 is high school grad and or general experience. A GS3 is 30 college credits and or general experience. A GS4 is 60 college credits and or experience. A GS5 is a bachelor. Sometimes they want you to have it in a particular area, and that is if they allow you to substitute education for experience and or specialized experience. Specialized experience is defined as experience that you need hitting the ground running. GS7 is either superior academic achievement, you've got a bachelor's degree and you are either in an honor society or had a GPA in your major that was of a particular grade point average. And again, this will be all on the federal vacancy announcement and or specialized experience. A GS7 is 1 year grad school and or specialized experience. A master's is for a GS9 if they allow you to substitute education for experience and or specialized experience. And a GS11 is a PhD and or specialized experience. A GS12 is a journeyman level position. In other words, you are a subject matter expert in something. In GS13 and above is usually, not always, but usually supervisory or managerial in nature. Next slide, please. So now we are going to look at, some of you might be saying, let's say I want a job in New York City. Well, a GS5 step 1 will get paid $46,494. Now, each one of these grades, I told you it was GS1 through 15, has 10 steps. And the steps matter because the higher the step, the more you'll get. It's not as big as a promotion, but you will see an increase in grade. So one of the big tips that I would give you is that when you are reading a vacancy announcement, look at the promotion potential. If you're interested in a GS5 and it says the promotion potential is a GS5, that means there is no promotion potential. So some of you might be saying a GS5, I got a degree and I'm only going to get $46,494, but I want you to think big picture, because let us say the position is a GS5 with promotion potential to a 12. What that means is the first year you'd be getting $46,494. If your supervisor deemed that you were ready to take the next level of responsibility, you would get $57,594 as a GS7. A year later, once again, only if your supervisor states that you are ready to assume the next level of responsibility, you would go to a GS9, step one, which is $70,448. Next slide, please. A year later, what would happen is that you would go to a GS11, $82,236. Again, only if your supervisor deemed that you were ready to assume the next level of responsibility. And a year after that, you would be a GS12, step one. Now, remember, there are 10 steps, so your salary is not going to stay the same. Next slide, please. In New York City, a GS12, step 10, earns $132,807. That ain't bad for competing for a job just once. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And so let's talk about the application process. One of the things that I'm going to tell you is the best thing that you can do for yourself is every time you are interested in a federal job, you read the vacancy announcement from top to bottom. I know that's asking a lot, but I'm going to tell you this. Getting a federal job is a competitive, merit-based process. What that means is that everyone gets an equal shot at a job. You just can't make friends with the recruiter. You are going to be evaluated based on your experience and or education. So ensure that your vacancy that your application is complete by reading the vacancy announcement. Let us say that you are interested in a human resources specialist in the Social Security Administration, the United States Department of Labor, and the Department of Justice. What you've got to remember is that things may differ in the. You've got to be very careful as to what you are submitting. Next slide, please. You've got to remember that a selecting official is going to have the right to choose how they want to fill the position. They can do it either delegated examining, which is another way of saying open to the public. They can do it under merit staffing, which is for current and former permanent federal employees. They can do it under pathways, recent graduates and interns, or they can do it non-competitive. And that's for jobs that they find very difficult to fill. For example, IT specialists, and on top of it, cybersecurity. Next slide, please. So what you need to do is remember there are hiring paths. When you create an account on www.usajobs.gov, they're going to ask you a whole bunch of questions. And it will take you to login.gov, where you will have to put down the schedule that you're interested in, part-time, full-time, intermittent, under what groups you can be considered under. There are positions where you may be considered as a veteran or an individual with a disability or a current or former permanent federal employee or open to the public. Now, I'm going to tell you that announcement that is open to the public is not going to be large. It is going to be humongous. So try and get yourself considered under as many options as you possibly can. Next slide, please. So merit staffing is for current and former federal employees. And what you need there is time and grade. And that is, you need a year below the year that you are applying for and experience. Delegated examining, you now know, is open to the public. Next slide, please. So, with merit staffing, what you are going to need at some point is a performance appraisal or an SF50. Next slide, please. And that SF50 is going to ask you for certain information. I want to remind you, a 12 is not a 12 is not a 12. What some folks do is they look at a vacancy announcement and they say, oh, gee, I'm eligible for a GS-12 as a human resources specialist. I'm going to apply for an equal opportunity specialist at a GS-12. You have to read the vacancy announcement. You've got to remember an administrative assistant is not an administrative assistant is not an administrative assistant. Now, what do I mean by that? There are some admin assistants that only answer one phone line, but it's for the president of a company. There are other admin assistants that answer 20 phone lines plus disseminate technical information. And there are other admin assistants that do faxing, collating. What you have to do is look at the vacancy announcement, because nothing can be inferred. The rater can only use what's in front of them. As a human resources specialist that qualified and disqualified hundreds of applicants, I can tell you that most people don't take into consideration the vacancy announcement. Example, let us say that you're looking at an announcement and you can see that they want someone who has excellent Excel skills. Can't tell you how many resumes I've read that said, I am proficient in Excel. Does anyone want to tell me exactly what that means? Because I don't know. Versus the applicant that says, not only do I know all the basic functions in Excel, but on top of it, I know the following advanced functions, A, B, C, and D. Plus, I maintain daily a workbook where I have to update and delete information. And I know how to do pivot tables and charts. If you were a selecting official, would you want to interview, if you only had 1 hour left, the candidate who said, I am proficient in Excel? Or would you want to interview the candidate that went into substantive detail about their experience? I suspect you would interview candidate B, the one who went into detail. Next slide, please. So, you've got to have a copy if you are a current or former employee, federal employee. At some point, you'll need a copy of your latest performance appraisal, and it's got to be signed and dated. You'll need a copy of your notification of personnel action, but what you've got to remember is that certain personnel actions that say what happened to an employee are what I call no frills, and those are award actions. And what you've got to remember is that the evaluating HR specialist needs to know the grade, the step, the position occupied, the competitive service, and the type of tenure. Next slide, please. So, what to look for? This is what a vacancy announcement is going to have. Who may apply? Well, now you've got to figure out under what groups you want to be considered under. And remember, the vacancy announcement that is only looking at people that are open to the public, applicants that are only can be considered under the public, that's going to be a huge applicant pool. There's going to be the closing date. The closing date is 1 minute to midnight Eastern Standard Time. So that means you on the West Coast are going to have an earlier closing date. And you've got to remember that, because once that midnight hour, 1 minute to midnight comes, your application is frozen. You can't add to it. You can't take away from it. So if you see a job that you're interested in, what you want to do is apply as soon as possible. The Office of Personnel Management says that the most popular time to apply for a job is 1 minute to midnight. But What happens when a system is inundated? You lose information. You have problems. And while there is a person on every vacancy announcement that you can contact if you have problems, are they going to be there at 1 minute to midnight? No, they are not. A vacancy announcement is going to also state whether a position is permanent. The moment you see a not to exceed date, that means it's temporary. So even if you were in the position as a temporary appointment, you don't know how the selecting official is going to recruit, and you don't know where you would wind up in the list to be considered for the position. So just be aware of that. Specialized experience will be given on the vacancy announcements and examples, and it will tell you whether you can substitute education in lieu of experience. So have your transcripts. They usually don't ask for official transcripts. They know that you have to pay them, so have them ready. I would know that a lot of people don't read the vacancy announcement carefully, so I can't tell you how many times I got a phone call that said, Dolores, you'll have my transcripts in 2 weeks. Right then and there, I know that they didn't read the vacancy announcement, because most vacancy announcement, but read the announcement to be sure, you need the documents all submitted by the closing day. Remember, you can't add to it. You can't take away from it after that 1 minute to midnight. Now, also, you can see that some jobs are going to be recruited for at more than 1 grade. So let us say you've got a master's and you think you want to be considered for a GS9. Now, they're also recruiting for a GS5 and a 7. You get an email stating that you are not being considered for the GS9 for whatever reason. Well, very many times when people say, well, now I want to be considered for the 5 and 7, too late. Remember, your application is frozen. Now, language preferred and language required. Remember the differences. Let us say there is a job and you've got all the qualifications of the job, but it says Spanish required. That means you must speak Spanish. You will not be considered for the job unless you speak Spanish. Language required means, well, they would like you to speak Spanish. You don't have to. So you can apply for that job. If something is on a vacancy announcement, it is going to be used on the job. There are some investigator positions where you have to have a driver's license. We hired someone years ago, and the first week on the job, they were told to go from point A to point B in urban rush hour traffic. They turned around and said no. We turned around and said, but you click the radio button that says I have a valid driver's license. They said, I've had a valid driver's license for 10 years. I haven't driven in 5. So remember, if something is on announcement, it is going to be used on the job and you will be on probation. Some of you are going to want to travel. Some of you are going to want to stay close to home. If travel is required, it will be on that vacancy announcement. Next slide, please. So, the announcement will tell you everything you need to know, even something like the DD 214. They don't want certificates of military service. They want page 4, next slide, please, of the DD 214. So, as I told you before, next slide, please, they will give you the name, email address, and contact number of a person that is going to be able to answer any questions that you have. Now, there are different special hiring authorities. One of them is VRA for veterans, VEOA for veterans. There are hiring authorities for military spouses, for former Peace Corps and Vista volunteers, and on top of it, for people, individuals with disabilities. Now what I want you to do is, next slide, next slide, next slide. And next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next, Schedule A, next slide. In order to be considered as an individual with a disability, you need a letter from a medical professional or a vocal rehab specialist, private or state, or from an agency that gives out federal benefits. And what you've got to remember, it's got to be on official letterhead, it has to be signed, and it should not have any information other than what is on a template that I will send to you, and you will have that you can follow. Many doctors put down this person has cerebral palsy and therefore cannot use their left arm. It's nobody's business. They are to sign the template exactly as it is. Next slide, please. So, next slide, please. I just want to remind you, applying for a job in the federal sector is quite different than applying for a job in the private sector. What do they tell you in the private sector? Never, ever, ever go over one page, use buzzwords, and whatever you do, do not go into detail. Well, if you haven't figured it out by now, next slide, please. In the federal government, what you need is substantive detail. Demonstrate how long you've had the experience because, for example, follow the template that is in www.usajobs.gov because that will tell you everything you need to know in your resume. Very many times what people do is they put down the agency or the organization that they worked for, they put down the beginning and closing dates, and then on top of it, they leave it blank. Well, we need to know whether it was full-time, whether it was part-time. And if we have any questions, are we going to contact you? Unfortunately, no. There are too many of you. So you just won't be given the experience. So next slide, please. So think of it as a three-step process. Do you possess the requirements? Do you possess the minimum qualifications? Do you possess the specialized experience? Do you possess the competencies? They're also known as assessment questions. And what they will do is they will add, give you points towards your skill set. If you are found minimally qualified, you get 70 points. The object of the game is to get as many points as you can, close to 100 or over 100 if possible. Now, you get the points, and the points are going to decide who gets sent to the selecting official for consideration. And that is, you've got to remember, though, that the selecting official is not required to interview you or hire you. So it is your job to make it difficult for them not to interview you. You don't want to only prove that you are a good candidate for the job. You want to prove that you are a rock star candidate. Can we go into the internet, please? You're going to go to www.usajobs.gov. And that's what I've been talking about. And there are USA Jobs, right? Okay, now, this is what a federal vacancy announcement looks like. Now, if you listen to other presentations before mine, they talked about titles. They talked about series. A series is a family of jobs. So for example, I see 0301 and it's always 4 digits. That means it's a clerical position. Now, I also need to put down the location, or if I want a remote job, what I usually do is put down my area, my zip code. So in this particular case, I'm going to key in 0119. Now, before we press enter, I want you to see that you get help creating a USA Jobs profile, the federal job application process. And if you keep going further down the list, what you will see, keep going further down the page, please. What you will see is something that is called events. The Office of Personnel Management, the office that gives us the rules on how to apply for federal jobs, gives workshops, and you can see them right here. If you're interested in working for the Department of the Treasury, they give a workshop on writing your federal resume. The IRS is looking for hiring, accounting and collection hiring in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and there are loads of job fairs that you can attend, and some of them are virtual. But on top of it, OPM.gov gives workshops on navigating USA jobs, writing federal resumes. So you might want to take a look at that. Now, I want you to go to the top of the screen again and put in 0119. That is the occupational family series code for an economic assistant. And right on the economic assistant, you can see how much the person is going to get paid. It's part-time. And if you click on the economic assistant, what you will see is that it tells you what the minimum qualifications are. It will tell you what an data collection does. You can watch a video. And if I keep going down the page, and remember, the first few times, what I want to do is I want to read every part of the announcement, because right here you can tell whether this is going to be a good fit for you. Remember, they want a rock star candidate. And if I keep going down, it tells me the requirements. I've got to be able to drive in adverse conditions. And if I keep going further down, I can see that they are recruiting for a 5. What education? I can substitute and keep going down. And what I will see is something that is called, keep going down, how you will be evaluated. Now stop. What here it says, you may preview questions for this vacancy here. So click on that. And what you will see are the first questions. Keep going down the page, are eligibilities, keep going down the page, preferences. And then what happens is that you get to keep going down, assessment questions. They're also known as competency questions. Keep going down. And what they will do, here you go, right off the bat, you can see, let's look at the competency questions. I do not have experience, stop. I do not have, stop. I do not have experience or demonstrated capability in performing this activity, but I am willing to learn. Now, you put down regarding the skill set that they are addressing. But look at the opposite end. I have extensive experience. I'm a master. I'm the one who everyone goes to if I need help. If I look at a vacancy announcement, I see that most of my answers, I do not have experience or I have limited experience. This may not be a good job for me. But if I have excessive experience or I have a fair amount of experience, then what I might want to do is create a resume for the job, apply for it. I'm allowed on opm.gov to have at least 5 resumes. However, you now know that those resumes are just going to be the bones, because even if I applied for this job a month ago in the exact same agency, in the exact same location, in the exact same department, the competency questions could change. And remember, missing an answer to a competency questions, you don't know how many points they're worth. So if you miss one, you could miss 25 out of 30 points. So you've got to be very detailed when you are creating a federal resume. Any questions?